I feel like we made it sound like that's not the case. No, it's a great movie.
That'll be the
actually,
open.
I feel bad. Like, I feel like we picked it apart so much, but like, I hope it doesn't come across it like I disliked it. That movie's fantastic. Psycho is it's a masterwork. I just think that I don't need that explanation at the end at all. I hate that part.
I 100%. I agree.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
Welcome back to Midnight Local. Today we were talking about the 1960 classic Psycho.
Yeah.
The most analyzed, discussed horror film of all time, possibly.
Debatable if it's a horror film.
Well, sure. Yeah. I guess I keep saying that because we're in like Halloween season, but really what I mean is just sort of spooky, thriller, scary movies. Not all horror, I suppose. What would you define as hard horror?
That's a really good question. Horror, well, first off, it has to inspire actual fear, I think, in the viewer. I'm never really afraid when I'm watching Psycho. I feel like
now you're not, but in 1960, I think you would have been at least shocked, if not afraid.
But then that's not horror.
I think people were afraid by this movie. I remember like one of the sort of like classic things about this movie is it made people afraid to go into the shower.
Yeah, that's true. So that may be true. Okay. So, but the three types of horror, and I forget how this works, are dread, disgust and fear, or dread, terror, and fear. And the way that they work, if I'm not, the way that someone breaks it down with a tiger, terror is that the tiger is in a room with you.
Okay.
Dread is that the tiger is coming to the room with you.
Uh-huh.
And what was the three I gave you? Dread, terror, and
fear. Wasn't it fear?
And just general fear. Oh yeah, and fear is the tiger might be in the room with you.
Okay. You can't see if it is or isn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the three states. Like the dread thing is like it's coming and there's nothing you can do about it. Terror is it's happening right now, and fear is it could happen at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard more than one person describe this as possibly an early slasher, which I find interesting.
I buy that. He does a lot of slashing.
He does. That's all we see him do in a horror sense. But if you're watching this as a first-time viewer, which I'm not sure anyone in our generation would ever have the luxury of being.
That's in my notes.
Yeah, you've got an unknown slasher until the very end of the movie for some people.
Well, you know the that's what. Okay, hold on, hang on, hang on there. I got hold it there.
Should we start with just the nuts and bolts of this movie? 1960, hour 49 minutes.
Yeah,
rated R.
That's a good question. It couldn't have been rated R in 1960 because there was no such thing.
Well, and so that was actually how I was going to open this episode. Is like this movie came up in the last episode because we've been talking about pre-code films, and I was curious about talking about a movie that was solidly in the code era, and then Psycho popped into my head, and I thought, how did Hitchcock get away with Psycho? Because this movie opens, you have divorce, premarital sex, and partial nudity in the first scene.
Yep.
You talk about drugs for no reason, really, except to just stick a middle finger up to the censors when you go to the office. And it's not like hardcore drugs, but she's talking about taking tranquilizers, and it's making her husband mad. Her coworker is, who's played by Hitchcock's daughter.
Oh, that's interesting. Did you catch his cameo in it, by the way?
Yeah, it's like
he's brief. He's just outside the room.
He's outside. It's like 6 minutes in or something like that. Yeah. And then there's undressing, there's the shower. It's the first time you see a toilet flush in a movie, which a lot of people note, which I think is a really funny thing.
I had no idea.
In context of like bathrooms sort of being off limits and things like that, he does have all of these little like try and stop me moments in this movie.
Is it really? I find it hard to believe it's the first time a toilet flushes on camera.
I will be honest, I did not really do a deep dive into whether or not that was true, but it was mentioned in multiple things I read about this movie.
I think that too, also, like, a lot of people use ever in a very limited context. Like when people talk about the worst president ever, and then they name the 4 presidents they've had in their lives, and I'm like, whoa. Are we forgetting
Sure.
Franklin Pierce and William Tyler, for example? Aren't we forgetting, like, what do you have a very narrow concept of ever. It would shock me if this was truly the first time a toilet was flushed in a movie.
People tend to be hyperbolic for sure. I think
might be
toilet touching. We are looking also directly into the toilet, which maybe is the more notable thing. I mean, she's throwing paper into it. It is nothing even remotely.
No poops.
Yeah, like it's grotesque or anything of that nature. It serves a very specific function. So I don't know. That is a noted thing. But to come back to, he didn't really get around the code. This was like the first nail in the coffin to end the code.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the end. And two factors there. One, Breen is getting old.
Yeah. Well, they've appointed all these other people to enforce it.
Okay. There you go. I didn't know that.
Yeah, like there's like a famous quote that like Jeffrey Sherlock, I guess, was an enforcer, and someone said he was not immune to the lubricating effects of alcohol. Like it had spread out. It had spread out to enough hands that corruption and influence were breaking the code apart.
Dictatorships seldom survive bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, bureaucracy is supposed to be a check against dictatorship. Anyway, and also like times are changing, and also Hitchcock is like, you see this too, like Otto Preminger, Hitchcock, Billy Wilder. Certain directors have just such power that they can kind of push the limits of the code more than a lot of other people can.
Yeah, when he makes this movie, he's coming off North by Northwest, which was my
favorite Hitchcock film.
Success. I mean, and that movie had a huge budget, $3 million budget. It's in color. You've got planes. Like, it's a totally different ballgame of a movie. And then
another celluloid closet film, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Abe
I have to rewatch that. I haven't watched it in a little while.
Martin
so I forget
Landau.
Everything that's in there.
People say that the Martin Landau character is like a coded gay character, but
interesting. I do feel like Hitchcock gets a little bit Shakespeare'd in a way that like he's so talked about and picked apart. Have you ever heard? I think like Shakespeare. There's a scene. There's a story close to this. If this isn't the exact story, there's a third man who pops up in a scene where there's been like two guys sort of talking back and forth. It's not Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but someone of that nature.
Okay.
And there have been entire articles, books like written about the meaning of this third man.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like probably not there. He probably just made a mistake, continuity error, was writing words, like was getting paid by the word,
Yeah. Well,
was maybe different people.
Yeah. Or maybe, he had a troupe of actors that he was working with. People forget that too. He didn't like go around casting. He had a theater troupe. Right. And like, Tom needs a scene.
Right.
That can be a factor. God, exactly. Tom's got nothing to do. I mean, we got to get him into this place somewhere.
Right. So I think like with Hitchcock, you get like analysis about like the different floors of the mansion and Psycho being the id, the super, it's just, it gets sort of picked apart in that way. So it really decidedly not, especially with this movie. Yeah. He had $800,000. Nobody would give him money because of the script, because of what he wanted to do with it.
Right.
He used the crew from Hitchcock Presents to make this movie. Like this was it. That's why it's black and white. Like he is just, I'm going to make the movie I want to make. And it's like a low budget film. And he like calls it a comedy, not because I think he means it to be a comedy, but he was playing with film techniques and sticking up his middle finger to the censors, I think, when he made this movie.
Both those are true. And also, have you ever watched Hitchcock Presents?
Not much. Now I really want to, but I haven't seen much of it.
It's like his version of The Twilight Zone, except it's just murders. And Mrs. HTD, who would prefer not to be mentioned by name on camera for some reason. But she and I got into it for a while. And, like, it's all funny to him. Like, he introduces every episode, and every single one of his intros is, like, the goofiest, comedic, just, like, ham-fisted jokes about murdering people. and then we see the thing, and like I think he did just kind of, to him it probably is a comedy. Like I think he had a real twisted sense of humor. So for anybody who has not had Psycho spoiled for you somehow, this cultural phenomenon, tune out. I don't, go watch the movie and come back. This is a top of mind thing for me, okay? And it's before we even get into the analysis of the film. Hitchcock is famous for being the master of suspense. That's what they always talk about. And that's, what is that? That's the that's like the dread type of horror, or maybe it's the fear type of horror, right? Like it might happen, but you don't know when, or it will happen and you don't know when, kind of thing. So it could be a mix of the two. Anyway, because of Mrs. HTD's predilection for losing interest in every single thing you watch about 60 minutes in and falling asleep, we had to watch this in 2 settings. And I will tell you, it really knocks the wind out of his suspenseful sails. That giant pause, trying to rejoin this movie about halfway through and get right back into the same mindset you were in the first watching is like...
At what point did you jump out and jump back in the movie?
She fell asleep just before or just after the private eye gets killed.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. So you're really jumping into, I'd say, the third act then.
I would call it the 2.5 act.
2.5. Okay. So it is.
Yeah. So people always talk about the third act, but I had a writing teacher who said, but really there's a 2.5 act because you haven't resolved the tension, but you have in every effective script a moment about halfway or 2/3 through your second act where you fundamentally increase the stakes a lot. And also to call this movie a 3-act movie is maybe a real oversimplification because it is a really strange structure. But yeah, I think that the third act for me is because he kills again after that, right?
You have Marion and the detective.
He doesn't kill after the detective?
Arbogast. No, you meet Mother. I guess could be considered the third. But after the detective dies is when you learn there's more of a history here. There's more of a past.
Yeah.
You know that there was a mysterious killing of his mother or death of his mother and her boyfriend.
And potentially somebody else because as the sheriff says...
2 other girls,
Well, who was buried in Mother's grave.
Well, there's that. And then there's mention of 2 missing girls. And the hole in that he famously peeps through, it's there. He doesn't he's used it before.
Oh, yeah.
So that would suggest that this is not the first.
This just occurred to me. I wonder if this is one of the first portrayals of a serial killer in film.
I don't know. I didn't look into that.
It's
fact.
Not. M would have to be at least significantly earlier. But I mean, I know that in the 60s, the concept of a serial killer was just being kind of codified in the FBI. There's that whole Mindhunter movie about it. But M, the German Peter Lorre movie, which everybody should see, is probably the first serial killer flick.
I'd be surprised if no one had made a story out of Jack the Ripper or something like that by this point.
Oh, I don't know.
And in the 1920s, you had Holmes, the Chicago killer, that people would have known about. I don't know if they'd made any media about him, but during he certainly existed in the psyche of people as a serial killer. Yeah,
I mean, I think that, and that's actually a really good comparison here. We're going to get into that. But I think that the serial killer as defined is a little bit different, or pattern killer is that they don't choose their victims based on what you would call normal parameters.
There is nothing seemingly premeditated. His are all crimes of passion.
Kinda.
Yeah.
In the moment, yeah, but
if she doesn't show up at his hotel, he doesn't kill her.
And that's true, and that's what I wanted to compare this to Halloween, in that Halloween, Michael Myers is a tiger. He's hunting you. Yeah. In Psycho, he's a spider. You have to wander into his nest first.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
But okay, so Psycho. A couple of things about Psycho that are famous. One, the switcheroony.
Yeah.
You are fully an hour into this movie thinking that it is a movie about a woman robbing her boss.
Well, not quite an hour. 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
No, we clocked it. It's an hour.
Before she shows up at the hotel?
It's an hour. No, at the hotel. No. It's an hour before she gets murdered, and you find out that this is a movie about a murderer. Yeah. Because up until that point, it's still, even when she gets to the hotel, it's still about her running with the money.
Right. Well, and if you put this into the context of what people would have been expecting during the code, you are on a wholly different adventure. And I think everything, all the direction of the police officer, it looks like when's the suspense you're feeling is when and how does she get her comeuppance for being a thief and stealing
bad
this
girl.
money.
Yeah.
A bad girl. Yeah.
Yeah. A femme fatale. I mean, and it's late for noir, but it feels like a noir. And that's actually a big part of, I think, why he got away with it, is because all the baddies get punished. You know, her premarital sex gets punished. Her stealing the money, she gets punished. Although we never find the money, which I think is fun.
I think it's in the. Doesn't he throw it in the car, in the trunk of the car?
No, because he doesn't know that it's wrapped up in the newspaper.
He doesn't know it's there. I thought he found the newspaper when he was gathering things. It's like the last thing that he grabs.
Maybe he did, but he never looked for the money in it.
Right, he doesn't. He just throws it into the car with everything else. Because for a moment you think the newspaper is still going to be there and that's going to link him to it, and you think that's how he's going to get caught, and then he goes back into the room and he grabs it. I'm going to get us there quickly. We meet Marion. She's dating Sam. Sam is divorced. They don't have enough money to be together because he has debts from his divorce. And from maybe starting a business or something. And so in order to be married to this guy, they have to come up with some cash. And she has cash fall into her lap. She's supposed to deposit in the bank.
Yep.
And as Norman would say, in a moment of madness, she decides to take the money and run. She switches out her car. That scene is 100% just used for misdirection. There's no reason for it to really be there. It
increases tension. It just increases the tension.
That's right. Exactly that.
In a way that has no bearing on where we're going with the plot. I mean, like, it just increases your sense of anxiety while you're watching the movie, which I think is kind of cool, actually.
Yeah.
This just sort of no, I'm just gonna give you a panic attack while you're watching this movie, because I can.
She's not doing anything illegal, but understandably, like, a woman coming in to buy a car quickly with all cash is suspicious.
She's definitely doing something illegal. She has $40,000 of stolen money on her.
In the transaction of buying the car, she isn't. Yes, but you're absolutely right. She's got all her papers. She's got everything.
Sure.
You're right, though. Absolutely.
I also love, too, that, like, the missus and I were watching the movie, and we're just like, but wait. She's switching cars to evade the cop. The cop is watching her switch cars. Why is she going through this?
Absolutely, that's what I mean. But it's just like an absolutely, tension-building, ridiculous scene.
Ma'am, I noticed you're switching cars. Not suspicious.
And then she's driving, thinking through all the scenarios of how she's going to be caught. It's pouring rain, which prompts her to pull over to a hotel to sleep through the night.
Bates Motel. He doesn't even want customers. He forgets to turn on the light.
But it used to be a busier hotel, but now the highway has been built and he's off the highway, so he's lost a lot of business. But he's not really trying to get more business. He's sort of happily sitting there.
Yeah.
He's a hermit. Later, he's described as a hermit.
Right, exactly. She permits herself to have this bizarre conversation with the guy who runs the hotel.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Oh, I run this hotel. You want to hang out in my parlor where I keep my taxidermy and I'll feed you a sandwich?
Do you think that maybe wouldn't have
fuck?
been as weird in a time really before, like, fast food and things like that? Like, maybe at a motel, something like that might have been expected?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
I don't think so at all. Because you go to a motel and he's probably got other customers and he's not like entertaining them all. I think that the only reason that she agreed was because she was in that way that, like, people cooperate with the police to, like, not look suspicious when they're clearly the criminal. Like, I think she was just like, I think the idea is that she's just agreeing to anything to look not suspicious.
Yeah, her brain is on fire right now because she's done. Well, and he's very unassuming. Like, he's
now. I mean, now you look at that guy. Yeah, no. With hindsight, you're like, this is one of the quiet types. We got to watch out for him. You know.
But this is another, like, that scene. For the first time you see it, you could feasibly walk away from that scene being like, yeah, it's a little awkward, but he convinces her unknowingly to return the money.
Yeah.
And so as a first-time viewer in the 1960s, you might think, oh, the whole point of that scene was to change her heart.
Yep.
Yeah. He's got his famous lines about a boy's best friend is his mother, and we all go a little mad sometimes. All happens in this speech.
That's a real weird thing to say about your mom.
Yeah. Well, and I think they are building that tension in these moments of, like, that's odd.
I do want to point out, and we mentioned this, it's hard to watch this movie, and you must, I think, in the imagining that you don't know that he's the killer.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to try to put that hat on your head.
To fully appreciate its impact, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the shower scene is famous. I don't know how we're not getting glimpses of the naughty bits in there, and yet Hitch is a master of avoiding the glimpses. You know, they're not in there, I don't think, even on a frame-by-frame basis.
There's an entire documentary made just about this scene.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but the most famous or the most notable one or most recent maybe is 78-52, and it's called that because it was 78 camera setups and 52 cuts.
Oh, wow.
In that scene. And I remember from
wow.
Film school days knowing that there was a ton of cuts in these scenes sort of famously. And the first time you watch it, you don't really feel that. You really have to watch it thinking about that to be like, wow, they are cutting constantly.
Yeah, and it's a testament to the power of film language and real masterful use of the quote invisible edit. You know, the Hollywood editing that you don't even notice. It's incredible, right? I regret I don't know who cut this movie. And it's funny, too. I looked up. You mentioning, by the way, that it was made by the crew from Hitchcock Presents. That answers a big question for me because I was watching this movie thinking like, oh, my God, this had to be shot by Greg Toland. It's got so much like chiaroscuro film noir lighting and stuff like that. And then I looked up the cinematographer and it's not Greg Toland. It was John L. Russell, who basically only did TV other than this movie. Editorial department, Jim Wilkinson. Oh, negative cutter. Okay. Maybe Hitchcock edited it.
Possibly.
Oh, no. Editing by George Tomasini. Oh, George Tomasini was Hitchcock's editor. I mean, like, he did other films, but a lot of Hitchcock. North by Northwest, Vertigo, The Birds, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which is the 1956 version. And one of my favorite things about Hitchcock is that he might be the only director to remake one of his own movies. The Wrong Man, which I think is a Hitchcock movie. He did Rear Window. Okay, yeah, this is Hitchcock's cutter, not the person who was cutting Hitchcock Presents. I don't know that they weren't able to do the job, but not that person.
What spoiled this movie for me in my childhood was Universal Studios' Alfred Hitchcock's The Art of Making Movies.
Oh, the Backlot tour?
Yeah. Well,
wow.
It's been closed for a long time, but they rebuild the shower sequence or part of it and give you a bunch of facts about Hitchcock. Because Anthony Perkins narrates that whole experience. I've got a video going and then like a live component. And he's the person in the wig for that sequence isn't him. It's a double.
I wondered about that.
Well, and she's a double too. Janet Leigh is a double, but that didn't come out for years. That was kept secret for years.
It's funny that it was kept secret. I wonder if the person in the wig a female double.
I don't know that.
I wonder if there was like that level of misdirection, like it's a woman playing mother throughout the movie until
right. So you can't even accidentally catch his face.
That's what I would do.
This scene in particular, I think, just had such an impact on cinema forever and this movie. But movies used to be something that people would kind of come and go from at the movie theater. You would just run movies on a loop a lot of the time, and I guess you could like come in the middle and you'd stay through and then watch the beginning. And it was much more sort of loosey-goosey than we think of things today. He wouldn't allow that for this movie. Like, you were not allowed to enter after the movie had started. And all this buzz was created, like in the documentary about the shower scene, you've got all these famous people who have memories of their first time going to see it. Like, everyone knew something was happening here. The promos were all Vera in a shower, the woman who plays Marion's sister.
Oh.
Because if you also like put yourself in the context of the 60s, Janet Leigh was like this huge star. Like,
she was. I was just looking at her listing and I was like, really?
She was, but she was a known, well, maybe not a huge star like in movies that you would recognize, but she was married to Tony Curtis and they were very high profile.
She was a high profile person.
Yeah.
What I was about to pull out was that 2 years before this came out, she was in Touch of Evil, which is largely regarded as the last noir. And I wonder if that was also strategic, like tying this, known
Picking
femme
her
fatale
for that reason, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. even more, that builds even more of this context. And I think like no one would have imagined that she wouldn't have survived a film.
Well, and I mean, how insane and this is the real thing, right? Like killing the main character in the movie. That's what it is. She is the main character of this movie for an hour and then dies.
Yeah. Yeah. In this way that it's like, if you took Julia Roberts in the 90s and killed her in Saw, except you didn't know what Saw was going to be. Yeah. And she's just like bloodied everywhere. Yeah, and I know that's not what the scene is, but in that time, in that context, it was like her
60 minutes into Erin Brockovich, she gets shot in the back of the head.
Right. Like her face on the bottom of that bathroom floor that is to me like one of the most horrifying images. Her lifeless face on the like shoved into the bathroom floor. Yeah. Actually, shocking.
It's that, and also this is just a weird aside. Wife and I have been watching a lot of X-Files, and the people playing corpses in it are terrible. They they don't even try.
It's a funny thing to like look out for.
Yeah, they don't even. I mean, look out for it. They don't even try. A lot of times they blink, like their arms are moving. And the first thought I was like, "That's how you do it. That's how you play a corpse. That person looks fucking dead."
Dead.
To the point where I wondered if it was a still, actually.
I do wonder if there's a film trick there for
There's
sure.
a lot of stills used in movies. If it was a still, it was re-recorded, because one of the main problems with using a still in a movie like this is you can tell because the film grain doesn't move. If they did that as a still, I would bet, this is just off the top of my head, they shot it on like a 6-inch by 6-inch plate in the finest film they could, so it was like 0 grain, and then they reprojected it and reshot it with a moving picture camera at normal grain, so that it would, to basically implant moving cinema grain into the photograph so that you couldn't tell it was a photograph. That's how I would do it.
Yeah. Well, that's
expert filmmaker. That's what Greg would do.
Another interpretation of Alfred Hitchcock's intentions in making this movie was that he was just like showing people what you could do.
Oh yeah, there are macro shots of the drain, for example, in this movie where I'm watching and I'm like, glass-wise, that would have been really hard in 1960. And they used to do things where they would just build, like, we need a close-up of this telephone. We're going to build a really big phone. We're going to build a 4-foot telephone. And I wonder if that drain is like massive, that they built it huge so that they could get the camera that close.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I think Hitchcock did that in Dial M for Murder, so it wouldn't surprise me. I think the giant telephone is used in Dial M for Murder. Could be misremembering that. That's a weird movie.
If you want to pick apart this scene moment by moment, 78. 52.
We get comments on this show sometimes when people are like, I fucking wish Greg or Meredith would do some real research before making this.
This movie has been I can tell you all that they used Hershey's chocolate as her blood to go down, but like there's a million places to go see that. What I'm more interested in is like, she's dead, like the context of what was happening in people's heads in the 1960s, why this was so shocking.
Right.
Yeah. She dies, and you are now left with Norman as the character you know best, that you are most... And I guess...
Well, then briefly, Arbogast seems like the main character.
They cut to the sister and to Vera and... Lily Crane and Sam Loomis, which Loomis is used over and over again in horror movies.
Oh,
it pops up as a name in Halloween. It's also in Scream. Billy Loomis is the killer in Scream.
Yeah, definitely references. Okay.
Scream references. Or Scream is like a love letter to
cinema. Yeah.
This movie and all. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, specifically this movie. You're right.
You don't really take to those characters very much. I guess you go back to sort of, yeah, I mean, they're talking and it's back to the sort of this quippy Hollywood dialogue. And after being with Norman, who like almost feels unscripted, I know he's not, but his performance is so awkward and he trips over himself and what he's going to say, that
there are moments that are so authentic
yeah,
in his performance that I'm really impressed. And then there are moments that are so stilted where it's just like, where'd that guy go? You know, like exactly when you talk about like him offering the guy, like tripping over his line, but he's like, offer the candy or whatever. And like the way he shrugs it off or something, I was like, ooh, that was like a real moment. That felt like not acting, you know, and that's to me what I'm always looking for is acting that doesn't feel like acting. I hate acting that feels like acting. And there's definitely a few other moments in this movie too that are just like that. And how compelling. you know?
Yeah, he's got you totally off guard because even when he's talking to when he does talk to the detective, he's so bad at trying to hide this. He's so unpracticed. Like, there's nothing refined, there's nothing quippy, there's nothing Hollywood about him.
No, well, and that's an example though where I don't know. I'm thinking about like those moments when he feels unscripted. I think I watch those and I'm like, oh, I could see how this guy like he seems nice. He seems like a cool guy. He seems authentic and real and normal and cool and doesn't set off any red flags at all. And then you see like how bad he is at lying, and then you think, how is this the same person?
Yeah, interesting.
He went from cool, like, it almost feels like a mistake. I don't know. It seems like he went from cool as a cucumber to a bumbling idiot in an edit, in a cut, you know?
I don't think anyone's ever come sniffing around before. I think because he's so unassuming, just being like, no one's been here would have been enough. It was clearly enough for the sheriff in town, who you have to practically beg to get him to even consider the possibility that this guy has done something messed up. And then after she dies, you spend a good long time with him in that cleanup scene. Like, we are with him for 5-6 minutes, like a while.
Yeah, and it feels pretty gruesome, honestly. In some ways, it feels more gruesome than the murder. Moving around dead bodies visibly, you know, and like we get some Tarantino feet shots and stuff in here too. They feel intimate in a way that would have been unsavory, I think, in 1960. In the same sense that the movie opens with her in bed with this guy.
Well, and he's clearly done it before. After his initial reaction of surprise, he's got a very casual nature about
that moment when he's
watching robotic
the car go into the mud, and you can tell he's like not sure it's going to sink. He's like really hoping that's going to... That's a lot of car to put into this mud. Oh boy.
And there might be a couple other things down there too. Yeah, so who knows? Like,
I think that one thing that this movie is playing on is 1960 Americana. I grew up on Westerns kind of representations of men thought processes. And this movie is saying, you see, this is what happens when you raise a mama's boy. He gets all fucked up in the head, and he turns a little bit gay, and then he kills pretty women. Mm-hmm. And I bring that up, too, because this is also another character whom is regarded as being gay-coded, right?
That's pretty split. Like, what launches his psychosis is his attraction for women. And it's not it's in his mind. It's when he feels he wants to pursue that is when his trigger goes. So there is an attraction there for sure.
Well, maybe it's less that the character is coded gay than Anthony Perkins is, because he was a closeted gay man who was not happy about the fact that he was gay, apparently, from what I just looked up. And I have heard elsewhere that it held him back in his career as well. So I don't know that it was entirely unknown.
I see. Well, he'll definitely bring that to the role. I mean, he is effeminate in his movements, and they also sort of answer that, though. I feel like the detective's the detective at the end of the movie, or the cop, his psychiatrist, the psychiatrist
I fucking hate that scene so much.
I do too, but I also feel that speech, there's so many problems in that speech for me, but I do feel like Alfred Hitchcock puts it in there to be like, none of this funny business. I'm telling you exactly what this is. He says that as he becomes, like, you can write off the effeminate nature of Norman to him becoming more his mother. Like, maybe he wasn't always that way, but as he gets deeper into this, and like the detective, one thing he says is that he's more his mother than he is Norman at this point. So
but okay, I don't know is your problem with that scene the science of it, or like the film, like from a film perspective? Because I couldn't care less about the science of it. My problem is as a filmmaker.
I mean, I don't really care at that point. It's just like that. No, my biggest problem with the scene is her sister's like, so did he kill my sister? And
no.
He's
but
like,
also, yes.
He's like, that's a really interesting point. I would stand up and strangle that guy. Like, give me an answer. Fuck you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, funny you should ask.
I hate it just because it's like, okay, now for the next, I don't know, 15 fucking minutes, this man is going to stand on camera and explain the movie to you, when it would have been fine to just end the movie.
Probably,
Fine to just end it. You know, I hate it, and I also wonder is it done without irony, or is this that moment in the movie again where we're playing on the idea of this is what happens when you raise mama boys? Are we now playing on the oh my God, these stupid head shrinkers with their highfalutin ideas? He's a murderer. Who cares? You know, look at this windbag jabber jibber on.
That's so interesting because I come at this movie knowing that Norman's the killer, and when the detective is talking to him, I feel protective of him.
Oh, you do?
Like, I almost don't want him to get caught. And it's like, logically I do, but there's something about him that I'm just like, as the guy keeps pushing, I'm getting nervous for Norman. I think that's
so weird.
I
don't get that.
I don't know if that's just me or if that's like a thing that other people feel watching this movie.
It's not just you, though, because people love the villain. Like, I never got into The Sopranos, but like, you know, if you're watching that movie, you are watching your protagonist is a bad man and you're rooting for him. The same thing in another one I never got into, Breaking Bad, or any of those shows where like your protagonist is definitely the villain of this story.
Yeah, right.
And you want to see them win, I guess, in some level.
He's the person I know I've spent the most time with, that I'm like, and so, which is another code breaking thing. To me, that's the biggest code shattering thing in this movie, is like, I am definitely sympathetic from him. And then at the end,
it inspires sympathy for the villain. Well, I didn't have that experience, so that might
which
be
is fair.
Semi-unique to you.
It might be unique to me, but at the end, I feel like he gives me like it's okay you feel that way by telling me like this is an abused child.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I'm like, oh, good. I'm not a horrible person. I feel sympathy for an abused child who never got help.
One thing about this movie too, though, is that like I feel like the descriptions from people who knew her of Norman's mother do not match up with Norman's interpretation of her, it seems like. Because they talk about her as like, well, she had this boyfriend, she was, you know, opened up a motel to make ends meet. Like, she strikes the picture of a person who's like got a life and doing things, whereas the version of her that Norman perpetuates is this biddy up there on a chair, just like lording over, this monstrous woman who is domineering and biddy kind of character. And I get the impression of a kind of a hard scrabble Depression era kind of like gal who had to make her own way. To me, they're kind of incongruous. I don't know if they would have been, if they're meant to be to the audience or to whomever or whatever. I don't know. But to me, it's like, I think that Norman's version of his mom feels like a version he made up, you know? Like this dude is just crazy and maybe even imagined his mom to be the way that he is now portraying her.
To make her more evil.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, a lot of people say, like, make it more Oedipal, like he's got an attraction for his mother. That
mother's a boy's best friend.
Right, and that's why he was jealous of the stepfather.
Right, because he definitely killed both of them.
Right.
First murder-suicide we ever done had around here. Obviously not.
Right.
Obviously he killed them. Yeah.
Do they ever mention what happened to his father?
I don't think they do.
They don't? Okay.
I don't recall that ever being mentioned.
And I know I actually didn't know until I was looking into this.
Oh, maybe he did kill the father.
Like his original father.
Yeah, that'd make it very edible. I mean, it was based on a novel, so presumably there's a lot more information in the novel.
Yeah, well, and they've made more around it. I think... There's
Psycho
a sequel,
2.
which people actually say is not a bad movie. They made it like years later, too. It was made in the 80s, yeah. Where he's getting out of prison, and I guess Lila, Marion's sister, is trying to stop that from happening.
As you would.
100%, yeah.
This dude's killed 6 or 7 people, we're pretty sure of. I don't think he should get out.
But people say it's a successful sequel. I didn't even know it existed. There's a third one. I guess there's one that goes back in time and tells the story of his mother and stepfather. And then there's
the series.
The series, which I know they lean into the gay-coded stuff in the series, from what I understand. Even in talking about this movie, it's hard to come back and talk about Sam and Vera because I just do not connect with them at all. And they're your like after the detective is dead, they're your characters that you're with through the end of this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think Lila Crane is kind of a badass. She's the one who's pushing things forward. She goes into the house alone. I love that. But
I love that she's like, no, we're gonna fucking do something about this. She is like not a wallflower character for a woman that's like a big. And I, to her credit, too, her sister is also a mover and a shaker, just you know, a flawed one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I kind of love that.
You get the final, I would say, iconic moment of this movie with the swivel of the chair and the reveal of Mother and the swinging light, which is beautiful.
Wonderfully referenced in Evil Dead.
Mm-hmm. But without
Probably
some of those things, you could almost forget that Lila and Sam exist as characters. Like,
I think you're right, and I definitely don't feel a deep connection to Sam, who's very passive. In this movie. I do get it from Lila. One little thought that I had, I really connected with the detective Arbogast because he reminds me of, I'm a huge fan of Dashiell Hammett. He's like my favorite writer. He wrote these hard-boiled detective novels in the 20s and 30s and short stories. Famously, he wrote The Thin Man. Famously, he wrote Maltese Falcon. Famously, he wrote, I'm trying to think of a couple of other ones that would be well known, but that's enough. But he wrote a series of short stories that are collectively called The Continental Op. And it's about the man from the Continental Detective Agency and his, you know, the things he goes and Arbogast reminds me of that character in some weird way, at the very least in his physical description. And then and the Continental Op, he wraps that up in Red Harvest, which is a wonderful novel that's been adapted into movies indirectly many times. Yojimbo is Red Harvest. Last Man Standing is Red Harvest, although it's an adaptation of Yojimbo, which is weird. Probably the closest thing to a direct adaptation is Blood Simple, which is a Coen Brothers movie. I couldn't remember if it was Miller's Crossing or Blood Simple, but I'm pretty sure it's Blood Simple because the phrase Blood Simple comes up in Red Harvest. I've gone blood simple because he's losing his mind, killing people, arranging. He's gone pretty dark, the Continental Op in this story. Yeah, I don't know. Something about Arbogast, like maybe just his physical portrayal felt like the Continental, and I liked that.
Yeah. Do you? So when you get him, you're like, all right, now I've got my new character I'm following who's going to solve this crime. Do you like that he's killed off? Does that help?
Oh, I love it. I think it's great.
Okay.
That actually surprised me a little bit more than Janet Leigh, of course, because you know that's coming. Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like you've got a main character, we kill the main character. Okay, now you've got the real main character. Nope, we don't. We're going to kill him again.
That's awesome.
I find the way he's like interrogating Norman so compelling. The way he's just agreeing with everything he says with a smile and just being like, oh, of course. And then he gets on the phone. He's like, this guy's lying through his fucking teeth.
Yeah.
This guy is so full of shit. I'm not satisfied at all. There's a lot more going on over here.
Yeah.
But he gets it wrong. He thinks it's this whole other thing where, you know, she's
What's he think
pawned.
again?
He thinks that she has paid him off or enticed him with sexual favors to keep her hidden.
Or he's gotten his hands on the money. Who comes to the conclusion that he's gotten the money so that he can start a new hotel somewhere else?
Arbogast maybe brings that up, or Sam brings that up as well. But one thing I love about the way that Arbogast dies is the shot of him coming up the stairs. I don't know how that was shot, but it looks surreal. It is very, very weird.
Up
looking.
The stairs are falling back.
No, the shot of him coming up the stairs. Obviously, the shot, and I think the shot of him falling back as well. But when he's coming up the stairs, I was like, oh, we're entering like a dream reality. There's something about the way the distinction between the foreground and the background, and it might be Hitchcock was, I don't know about famous, but he sometimes would shoot absolutely mundane scenes, like a scene of a person walking down a street in rear projection. Like there's a scene in North by Northwest where I can't remember his name right now, but our main character is just doing a walk and talk down the street in New York, and it's on like the worst rear projection you could possibly imagine. And the only thing I could think of is that like, it's a pickup. You know, like we're not going to go back on location because they're filming on location already, you know, at least outdoors. And so I don't know if it was something like that. I don't think so. It feels very intentional. There's something about either the depth of field or the parallax, like the way that the foreground and background are moving out of sync, but it feels like we're in a dream reality, like something out of Vertigo. And of course, the falling off down the stairs feels very similar.
Yeah, he was a filmmaker who always wanted to be using the tools at his disposal, like always wanted to be getting the most interesting image or trying something new or
Oh yeah.
yeah, it seems like this movie was a playground for him. I was listening to quotes from him. I almost felt like you know when a band sort of releases a song, like famously like Smells Like Teen Spirit, I think was one of these songs where it becomes their most famous song. It's like a song they just sort of didn't put much thought into, they just made. And it becomes their most famous song, and they have to then perform it over and over and over again for the rest of their lives.
Like, yeah, the song that was the radio hit that doesn't sound like anything else on the album.
Yeah, and they can never figure out like why this song. And this I think like Psycho kind of feels like that for Alfred Hitchcock.
Super Freak by Rick James.
Is that one of those?
The rest of so first off, one thing you don't know about Rick James maybe is that he started out in a punk band.
I don't know anything about Rick James, so that's a safe assumption.
Okay, well, I mean, he's motherfucking Rick James. And he he was doing I saw like this interview with like one of the guys in the band when they did Super Freak, and he came in with the song one day and the rest of the band was like, what the fuck is this song? Like, they hated it because it sounded so poppy and so not authentically funk. And I don't know if it was Rick James who said it or somebody else, but it's like, you need a song for the white people. And it's like, it's really in a lot of ways nothing like the rest of the songs in the repertoire. And there was like some interview where like the other guy in the band was like, son of a bitch was right, you know, he's a fucking genius.
Yeah.
But,
I think people think of this as Hitchcock's masterpiece. Some people do, and it's not.
It's not my fave.
Yeah.
I really, really, really like North by Northwest a lot. I also really, really, really like The Man Who Knew Too Much. Psycho doesn't do it for me that way.
I mean, I love this movie. It's almost because he had a huge success, and he didn't really. I don't think he was concerned about the success of this movie, so he pushed boundaries that resonated with people, and I think its impact makes it one of the best movies of all time. And I mean, I make it sound like he shot this like in an aloof manner. I mean, they took 7 days to shoot the shower scene, which was like almost a third of their shooting time. Like, there is a great care and detail taken in that. That is very intentional.
So one thing about Hitchcock is that he was so obsessed with pre-production and planning and shot planning and storyboarding and light diagramming and like rehearsals and everything that I have read and I have been told by other, film teachers and stuff that he sometimes didn't come to set. He knew it was like, we got it. You guys just have to go and put the pieces in the can.
I love that. As a director, his job was like, this should be idiot proof.
Yeah.
I love that. You
That
don't
was-
have that anymore. That does not exist.
No, I don't think you ever had that. That's Hitchcock alone.
Yeah.
Treating a lot like, major scenes in the movie as being something like second unit. So when you talk about, careful, meticulous planning, he is that guy. And then you get the other side of that, right? You get Kubrick, who was careful, meticulous planning and 300 takes.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. Never good enough. Never good enough. Yeah. I guess, have you ever watched the Gus Van Sant remake of this movie where he kind of does it shot by shot?
I may have accidentally once.
I know I watched it in college. It apparently exists on YouTube laid over each other.
Oh, interesting.
So you can kind of watch them next to each other.
Why would you
I was
do
just
that?
wondering if you had any thoughts on that. It's been so long, I don't really have.
My thoughts on it are that, hey, remember when what's his name was like a serious actor and not a comedic actor?
Vince Vaughn is Norman Bates in that movie. Yeah.
Well, like at that point in his career, that's the kinds of roles he was doing.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought that would have been a sidestep for him.
No. I think it was the end of a thing. Hold on. Let me look him up. I mean, obviously he broke out in Swingers.
People do not love him in this role. I think it's also such an interesting cast because Anthony Perkins feels so sort of slim and small and unassuming, and Vince Vaughn is like 6'4". He's huge.
He's a fucking giant. I've been in a room with him and it felt like his head was scraping the ceiling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's gigantic. And he's not just 6'4", he is broad. He is way bigger than he looks on camera.
So like,
it was
why
bizarre.
was that? Yeah, I'm so curious about that choice.
Vince Vaughn, he starts in 89 in China, in small roles. TV, he was on Doogie Howser in one episode.
Funny.
3 episodes of the CBS School Break special. Then his first real breakout in 77 Sunset Strip is a TV movie he's in, but I don't know what his role is. Swingers, Just Your Luck, which is a video of some kind. He's in The Lost World. Jurassic Park is his real follow-up to Swingers as Nick Van Owen.
Oh, that's right. He is.
Yeah,
That's
he's
funny.
in a movie called The Locusts, which I think is some kind of horror movie. Then he's in A Cool Dry Place, which looks like some kind of a thriller. He does one episode of The Larry Sanders Show, maybe finally getting his feet into some kind of comedy stuff. And then, I don't know what Return to Paradise is, but looking at the poster, again, a thriller. He plays a sheriff. Clay Pigeons, I can't tell what the hell that movie is, but it only has a 6.6 rating. Most of these movies have terrible ratings on IMDb. He was a voice in the Hercules TV series. He was Loki. Then he was in one episode of Mr. Show with Bob and David, again, dipping his toes into comedy. Great show.
Yeah, well, and Swingers, is Swingers kind of a comedy?
I've never seen it, but it is light.
I think so. I again, one I haven't seen since college, but.
Then he does Psycho. Then he does South of Heaven, West of Hell, which I believe is a Western. Then he does The Cell, which is probably,
that's horror,
somewhat forgotten.
Right?
It's 2000. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a horror film. Then you've got something called The Prime Gig, Sex in the City, Sex in the Matrix, a TV short. He plays a white rabbit. I don't know what that is. Then he was in something called Maid. And then finally, Zoolander. And he's uncredited in Zoolander. And then a TV series going to California, I don't know what that is. Domestic Disturbance, definitely not a comedic role. And then he does Old School, Starsky and Hutch, Blackball, Anchorman, Dodgeball. And it's like turning on a dime. And now he only does these kind of comedy roles. And I just think that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me of like a reverse Tom Hanks, who went from being this sort of madcap comedy actor, and now all he does are mostly dramatic roles. Now and again, you see him do a kind of a comedic turn. He's the anti-Hanks.
Yeah.
Speaking of Hanks, have you seen The Burbs?
I haven't, no.
We got to do The Burbs. That's a fucking great movie, and it's Halloweeny. And
it's like a crazy, it's like,
it feels connected to Psycho loosely. It feels it in a way. No, I'm retracting that. I did just watch From Dusk Till Dawn, which does feel very directly connected to Psycho.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch it. But how is it connected?
Do you want me to spoil it?
Should I watch it? Should we do it as its own episode?
Dusk Till Dawn changes into a different movie 60 minutes into it.
I see.
And not like a little bit, a lot of bit.
All the way a bit.
All the fucking way a bit.
Okay.
It turns into a completely different movie. And I should say less, because I think that's maybe its redeeming quality.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't know.
Maybe we won't cover it on the show, but I am curious about it.
The only other thing that I will say is that you get to see George Clooney play one of the evilest sons of bitches, I think, maybe ever. He is an unsavory character in this movie.
Okay. I did have one question. This might just be sort of like a fun game to play at the end of this to tie it back. But it's a bold statement to say that the shower scene is the most famous scene or the most redone scene in cinema. I think it's up there. What else do you think sort of hits that iconic status as a scene?
Oh, wow.
And the two things that came to mind for me, just to sort of
give me a jumping off point.
So two things that came to mind for me were Luke, I am your father, but that's really just a line, not the entire scene.
And when it's redone, I think maybe parody is the wrong way of saying it, but like not in a way that it is it's being copied. It's like a reference to it.
Yeah,
it's not an influence where it was like, oh, I got to do that.
I think that's, a strong point. In this documentary, they went through all the scenes that the shower scene had influenced. And it's like, I mean, just one after the other. The other was, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille, which is also was it also a line? So I was trying to think of iconic scenes.
I got one.
Okay.
The push through the door in
Citizen Kane?
No.
Oh.
No, the push through the door in
the Western Searchers?
Yeah, Searchers. Thank you. Yeah, that has been quietly redone in a huge number of movies. And on top of that, like, I think that Spielberg has basically said, that is why I make movies, that shot. So you can make an argument that every Spielberg movie comes back to that shot.
Okay.
And that's one. And The Searchers in general is so influential. I'm trying to think of like maybe another example of that.
Like famous horror scenes, or it doesn't even
You
have
want
to
to
be
do horror?
No, I mean like Exorcist is coming to mind right now, but I'm trying to like the piece, but it's not, that movie's iconic as a whole.
Are we looking for influence or reference? Because I feel like they're slightly different.
I think that's right. I think this is influence. I think influence is what I'm most interested in. I'm not finding it. I keep finding reference.
Maybe Cagney in the rain, walking in the rain as a walking dead man in Public Enemy. That might be highly referenced or influential.
What about like I'm Citizen Kane, because it's so cited, like the montage of the passage of time between him as a boy to him as an adult. It's like 3 shots famously or something like that, and you get everything you need to know.
Yeah. Was that the first time that something like that was
done?
I
don't know. And did that really influence people to do the same thing?
It truly might be.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought exercise because...
Yeah, like, I mean, like you can make an argument that Citizen Kane opened up new pathways in visual storytelling that had, I mean, like throughout the film would have had massive influence. Like the editing of it, in other words, has just the way certain sequences were cut would have huge influence on, an infinite number of movies. There's not infinite movies, but you know what I mean. But then you could also go back to like Battleship Potemkin, the silent film, for like the same reason.
Or like I'm looking at our list, is like Silence of the Lambs is breaking the fourth wall the way they do and looking into the lens. Is that something that you saw a lot of
Psycho.
Before then?
That's Psycho.
At the end, yeah,
you're
right. He does.
That's Psycho. I mean, that's right out of Psycho. He's talking straight to us.
Yeah, you're right.
And even that might be referencing something earlier. I was also going to say, I mean, and for me to be like massively influential, it's got to be like Root,
Yeah,
like
yeah, that's the other thing. It's hard.
It happened one night, basically inventing the rom-com.
You also have the time remapping or whatever. I don't think that's what you call it, but in The Matrix, that scene is one of the most talked about scenes. The circle around the bullet time. Yeah.
But that's more reference than influence. Again, are we at that point? Are we saying that? Or I don't know.
I don't know. People have. I don't know.
And also, it's so corny now.
It is, but that's so. But so is Psycho. So is the shower scene in Psycho. Like, to your point, people don't watch this and feel afraid.
No, but
I don't know if I call it corny, but
when I say like it's influential in that like you learn how to shoot a murder scene by studying the shower scene in Psycho, and so the bones of that surface or submerge into your murder scene. Whereas like, we're going to do bullet time in this, is a nod directly, it's an homage, which is a different kind of thing than being influenced by, in my opinion.
I think we'll keep noodling on. Maybe it'll come up again in a later episode, but we got to get out of this one.
Yeah,
we got
this is a long one. This could be a 2-parter. We could do the Psycho episode and then do Greg and Meredith. Greg gets canceled.
It could be a mini-sode, just like general talk about movies. Yeah, it's possible.
Greg doesn't care about your feelings in a nice way.
It's a great thumbnail.
Feel the way you feel. I go with that's good for you.
I don't need to hear about it.
Kinda.
Fair enough.
I love you the way I think you are.
All right, that is it. That is Psycho. Great movie. If you have not seen this movie, I think if you're like, oh, it's black and white, it's thoroughly enjoyable. It is not one that I would say you're only watching it for historical reference. You will watch it and enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. It'll pull you in. I feel like maybe we didn't even. I feel like we made it sound like that's not the case. No, it's a great movie.
That'll be the open.
I feel bad. Like I feel like we picked it apart so much, but like I hope it doesn't come across it like I disliked it. That movie's fantastic. Psycho it's a masterwork. I just think that I don't need that explanation at the end at all. I hate that part.
100%. I agree.
But that might have been necessary for the audience in 1960.
You could just end with him hearing his mother's voice in his head and referencing the fly, so you know he's not just hearing her voice, he is taking on her personality. I do think you need that shot, because I think that is such a moment where I'm not even going to kill that fly. They'll see how gentle I am. I'm not even going to swat that fly.
I hate to redirect Hitchcock, but how much more effective do you think it would have been, in my mind at least, to have the psychiatrist come out and be like, I'm sure he killed him, but I don't know why or how. And then you cut to him in that room and just being like in his head. That's what I would. That's me, the guy who's better than Hitchcock, would have done.
But I was asking myself this question this morning, like, without the explanation, is this movie as iconic, or does it become a conversation about what do you think happened at the end of Psycho? What do you think the ending is?
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's something satisfying to knowing it with this.
Yeah, but I question it. Like, I feel like it's an unreliable narrator's response. You know what I mean? Like, I can't hear that and not think, well, that guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Obviously, the movie wants me to come away thinking that. I think that, here's what I think. I think that if you had taken that out and done it the way we just described in 1960, it would have been poorly received as a strange movie, and possibly it wouldn't have been released, because I think you might need that explanation to get by the censors. But if it did, I think it would have been misunderstood by audiences at the time, and then it would have become this classic years later that people went back and looked at and said, oh my God, this movie, how did people not respond out of their minds to this?
And maybe that's why the filmmaking in that scene is so shitty. Maybe they told him he had to explain it, and so he said fine and set up a camera and here you go.
Here is this guy talking.
It sounds like something he would do, to be like, all right, if this is how this movie gets released, there it is.
Yep.
And there it is. We're ending it. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Good night. Good luck.
Check us out on Instagram and YouTube.
This is Greg, non-problematic, well-adjusted, straight white man saying, see you later.